All right, and we're back, for our second piece of the um, user cord part of our network. We left off dealing with the color code. Just a quick reminder: make sure you do spend some time learning this. Probably by the time you're done making patch cables, you will have learned it, but do spend a little time making sure you have this under your belt. It'll help later with troubleshooting. That is for sure. All right. I do have a separate podcast dedicated to making your patch cable, so I'm not going to walk you through that process right now. Look for that under the labs portion of this chapter. Under this chapter, there's a separate labs area, and I have the podcast for making patch cables in there. That'll walk you through that whole process. When we're done making our patch cable, we want to do a visual check, a visual inspection. So what's involved in a visual inspection? Well, after you're done making your patch cable, you should be checking as you go to make sure everything is right, but as soon as you're done, hold the end of your patch cable up. I often like to get a lot of light on it. Sometimes you might need to put a flashlight on. Check the wire color code. Make sure it's in the correct order. You might need to look at the connector from both sides to be able to see all the colors, but make sure they're in the right color code order. Compare the ends too. Make sure both ends are the color codes they should be. Make sure the pins are engaged in the cable. They should be pushed in and cutting through the insulation, making contact with the wire, so make sure those are engaged. Make sure the little wires have gone to the end of the jack and are being pierced by those pins. Make sure the wires are in the full depth. Yeah, make sure they're in the whole way, that the brass pins are piercing it. And make sure the jack itself is being grasped. The jack itself is grabbing the insulation. In most cables, it's the blue or the gray jacket. Make sure the connector is grabbing that insulation. There should be a little triangular piece coming in and grabbing that insulation. Make sure that's being done. The next thing you'll want to do is plug it into a meter and check its correct pinout or continuity of that. Well, to do that, let's talk about our three main types of patch cables, and when we actually, after we've done that, I will show you what the meter should be showing you for each of these types of patch cables. Well, the three types we commonly encounter, especially in networking and especially in our lab, are straight through, crossover, and rollover. Let's go through each one. We'll talk about function, then we'll talk about what it looks like when it gets tested. The first one is your straight through. This is designed to connect unlike devices. Connect my NIC on my computer into a switch port. Well, the NIC and the switch are different. They're unlike. So the straight through cable would be usable to connect them. This is also for connecting my PC to the telecommunications outlet, my work area outlet, and on the other end of the cable run, the patch panel to my switch. So any of those unlike things that I'm connecting, I'm using a straight through cable for. When I make this cable, I'm using the identical pinout on both ends of the cable. So I'd be using 568A color code on N1 and 568A on N number 2. I'd be using the same color code on both ends. So when I do that, and actually this is trying to show you cable 1 end over here, cable 2 end over here, I'm using the same color code the whole way through. White, green, green, white, orange, blue on this end. On the other end, same thing. White, green, green, white, orange, blue on the other end. Or I'm using the B color code, white, orange, orange, white, green, blue kind of thing. This is designed to connect unlike devices. And again, I'm using A to A or B to B on my cable. When I'm done making my patch cable, my straight through patch cable, I plug it into my continuity meter. This is the little meter that's in your toolkit. The little meter in the toolkit actually has a battery in, and what it does is it sends an electrical signal down the wire. You notice the meter comes in two pieces. There's the battery in the large end. As I plug the cable in, that battery in this end is sending a signal down the wire to the other end, connecting to the little guy. The little guy loops it back and sends it back to the large end, and if we get a complete path, a complete circuit there, these light bulbs go on saying, hey, you have a complete path from end to end. This wire pair is good. And it does that for each wire pair. So you got 4 lights here showing you the 4 wire pairs. And if I've wired it through all correctly and straight through like I should, I get 4, and this, I think ours is orange in our meter, 4 orange lights and a little pass light down here. And I also see the same thing on the other end. And it does that on purpose, especially this will become handy as we start testing our cable runs in the room. But this comes in 2 pieces and shows the results on both ends because A lot of times we're plugging one end of the meter in an outlet jack and the other end of the meter in the patch panel. So people in two separate locations can see the test results and know it's good. Well, on our patch cable, we can see both ends. We're looking for both ends to light up, that all four wire pairs are complete and there's no crossings, open, shorts, fails, anything like that. That would be my straight through cable on the continuity check. That's the good thing that I should be seeing. That's the proper result I should be seeing. If I plug it into a wire mapping meter, which we will do as well, the wire map, the meter itself has two ports in. You plug it in, plug one end of the patch cable in, plug the other end of the patch cable in. The meter actually sends a signal through the wire and kind of looks at where does it come out on the other end, and starts mapping that or showing that on the screen of, hey, I sent it in here and it came out here. I sent it in here, it came out here, and it starts drawing you a map saying, this is what you have wired, is that right? Well, that's what we want. That's our wire map. It looks nice and boring, but that's what I want. If I back up here, here's the wire map 4 straight through. That's exactly what I should be seeing. That is normal. That is perfect. That is awesome for a straight through patch cable. And you'll even notice on ours it gives you an approximate length on this cable too. It has basic TDR function, if you remember talking about TDRs. So it's giving me a basic length, and it's also giving me a wire map on the cable saying this is how you have it wired. Does that look good? There is your straight through patch cable. The next one we run into is a crossover. Well, crossover is designed to connect like devices to similar things, a switch to switch or router to router kind of thing. Well, when I connect two similar things, if you think about it real quickly, the switch would have maybe it might be transmitting a signal on pin 1. The other switch is going to be doing the same thing. It's going to be transmitting a signal on pin 1. So if I connect a straight through here, switch pin 1 is going to transmit to switch pin 1, which is trying to transmit to switch pin 1. We're going to have collisions. So when I'm connecting like devices, I have to use a crossover, and the idea of the crossover is all the transmits on one end get connected to the receives on the other end. They're being crossed over. The transmit and receive wires are being swapped. That way, again, the transmits on switch A are getting connected to the receives on switch B. So what happens now is all my wire pairs cross. The oranges and the greens swap places, the blues and the browns swap places. No matter what color code I'm using, that's what's going to happen. The oranges and the greens are going to swap, and the blues and the browns are going to swap. That's what I'm going to need to do, and that is connecting the sends over here to the receives over here. If I connect that up to my continuity meter, every wire pair is going to show a cross. So my continuity meter gets a little confused, but I can kind of use it to give me an idea if the cable's good, but it's going to show every wire pair crossed. So I need to do a visual check, really good visual check. I can use the continuity meter, but kind of pay attention to, do I get 4 crosses? Then I know I'm probably okay on this cable. The better way to do it is actually hook it up to a wire mapping meter, like I have here. And what I'm seeing is the oranges and the greens are swapping, the blues and the browns are swapping, just like this picture right there. That's exactly what I see on my wire mapping meter. And again, I see an approximate length of 13 feet on this cable when I made it. Those are super common cables that we use a lot, especially in labs in our room, connecting up, workstations in the switches with straight through, connecting router to router in the room with crossover. Very common. The last one we have is a rollover cable. This doesn't sound very common at first, but when you start digging into it, it actually is relatively common for us networking folks. The rollover cable is designed to connect our COM port, the serial port in the back of our computer, to the console port on a router, or switch, if you will. So the blue console cables we've been using that connect to the back of the PC and into the router port or the switch port for configuring the router and the switch, that is actually what's called a rollover cable. And the rollover cable, if I were to examine it, and one of the cable would be something like the 568A color code, and the other end of the cable is a directly opposite A color code. So in other words, if I terminate N1 with 568A, the other end of the cable, I take all wires and flip them over, or I put the connector on upside down, if you will, and I terminate. And I have taken all wire pairs and rolled them over. This is one of those, that's just what the routers and switches need. That's what it's kind of been figured out a long time ago, and that's what they need for communication. So my rollover cable, I'm going to terminate, cable N1. In this case, it's the A color code: white, green, green, white, orange, blue, orange, white, brown, brown. I will take the other end and I'm going to do it just the opposite. I'm just going to reverse it: brown, orange, white, blue, white, orange, green, white, green. In other words, I just kind of put the connector on upside down. When I hook it up to a continuity meter, again, it's going to be confused. It's going to go cross, 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 cross. Again, I have to do a very good visual check. The continuity meter can help me see if I have connectivity, but I have to do a really good visual check on this one, or plug it into a wire mapping meter. When I plug it into a wire mapping meter, I get that exact picture that we just showed you. This one right back there, where I'm showing the crossover, right, or the rollover right here in the middle. That's exactly what I see on my wire mapping meter. And here it's showing me roughly 12 feet on this cable. So there's your rollover. That's your console cable that should be the blue console cable that you're using. And believe it or not, you can buy that little adapter to plug into the COM port and make your own rollover patch cable to plug into it. You can actually do that. And years ago we used to do that because we needed to. We have lots of console cables now, so we don't really need to do that. When you're done making your patch cable, as always, do a visual check. Make sure the color code order, pins are engaged, wires in the full depth, jacks is grasping the insulation, etc., etc. And then, plug it into your meter to check your wire maps, your pinouts. Now, quick note before we move on: make sure you do recognize these wire maps. As we do our cables in the room and you test them, pay attention to them. Eventually you're going to have to troubleshoot these cables. So make sure you're kind of recognizing these wire maps of these proper cables now. Later on, when we start seeing problems, you'll know, hey, something's not right. I'm not quite sure what, but something's not right. You'll at least know something's wrong. The book reminds us again, these are at each end of the cable run. Each end of the cable run here in your closet, out your work area, okay? They remind us that, and this is actually kind of a little early for you guys, we'll talk about certifying our cable runs later this semester, but they say these are part of the channel link testing. And actually, if I were to look in 568C2, it defines channel testing. When I channel test, I actually test the horizontal cabling and both cords on each end to verify everything's working correctly. So my user cords are actually part of the channel link test that I would do. Again, we'll do that later this semester. But they're not part of the permanent link test, which again is a different test I can do, certification test. The permanent link is only checking the horizontal cabling. So the user cords are not part of the horizontal cable or the permanent link test. That's only testing the horizontal cabling. Again, we will do that later this semester as well. But they're just kind of planting that seed for later for you. Construction, as we said, we're using the stranded conductor, 24 gauge, 4-pair cable, terminated with RJ45. Yes, I kind of make them in various lengths depending on my need, but all these do need to meet transmission and performance specs and everything else. So we do need to test these and make sure they're functioning. I can use A or B color code, does not matter. The color itself of the cable really does not matter. It's up to me for organizing my closet and that sort of thing. My outer insulation should be PVC. Remembering our codes from earlier, typical patch cable is going to be general purpose cable, CMG or MPG. Remember this from earlier, back in Chapter 5. My insulation will be of that type where really flammability is not an issue. So most of my patch cable material is just that. That's fine. They remind us that this should match all the other standards that I'm dealing with, or all the other components I'm dealing with. Horizontal cabling, if my horizontal cabling is Category 6, my outlet jack should be Category 6, my patch panel should be Category 6, my patch cable should be Category 6. All this should match the whole way across. And my cable should be marked with that, so I know for sure the cable itself and any patch cables that I might be buying should be marked as thus. All right, I'm going to stop there. We'll come back with one last little tidbit to finish up the chapter.